Hi and welcome to the channel. So in this video I'm going to take a close look at the roof bars available for the Tesla Model 3. So these are the genuine ones direct from Tesla, and I'm really impressed with them actually. They're really solid quality, very easy to take on and off. So I'm going to look at all of those things in this video, along with a sound test and a range test with them on as well. And it was almost my intention to leave these on the whole time once I'd got them. Looking at the way they installed it did appear that taking them on and off might be a bit of a faff. So I was kind of thinking I would just leave them on. They look pretty aerodynamic, so I wasn't expecting much impact on range, but in reality they're so easy to take on and off that I do only put them on when I need them now. So usually I just whack them on for the weekends and then take them off for the week. Obviously it's a bit neater to have them off when you're not using them, even though they are really quiet, and I don't anticipate much range impact, but obviously I keep the bolts in for the cycle carriers on. So if I'm taking the cycle carriers off, which obviously are quite noisy, then you've got the little bolts sticking up off the top and the whole thing looks a bit crazy, so I just take the bars off when I'm not using them. So the bars actually have the standard T-track slot all the way across the top with the rubber thing that you can push down to slide in the bolts into the groove, and it works quite well. You can just tuck it in and slide it in, and there's enough pressure on there to stop them moving around, which means you can leave the bolts in place when you take things off the bars and when you store it, and then it's easy just to put it all back together again when you put it back on. So let's take a look at the fitting process. So basically the first thing you do is you stick on these little tape protectors for the paint where the foot pads will go, and these are permanent. Once they're on, they'll hopefully stay on forever. If they don't, I think you can obviously easily replace it with any kind of PPF sheet that you cut out to a similar shape if you needed to do that, but they look pretty firmly attached. So looking at the car, you wouldn't really think there's any obvious way that roof bars would mount firmly to the car at all, but there are actually proper mounts and they're concealed below the glass, and you just have to peel back the rubber to reveal those, and then you put the little clamps under and they tuck into the metal mounting bits under the glass, so they're not touching the glass from underneath, and the rubber pads that come down onto the top aren't touching the glass from the top either. So I've had roof bars on my previous cars and they've had the fixed roof rails. So the roof bars are the ones that kind of clamp on from the side, and they're actually quite a hassle to get on because you've got to rotate them into place. With these Tesla ones, they are very, very simple. You just clip in the metal things and then you just drop the bars on top of that. So it's actually surprisingly, given how sort of hidden away all the attachment stuff is, it's surprisingly easy to make it work. So they give you this little plastic device that makes it easy to sort of grab the rubber and pull it back. And if you do that, you can actually see the metal attachment point underneath there. So once you've got that back, you can then slot the metal thing in place. And you know that they're in the right place. There's not really anywhere else for them to go, and you can sort of feel that they're in the right place there. And then you can let go of the rubber and it'll just flop back. Now, interestingly, after they've been on for a few days and you take this all off, you can see that rubber is kind of deformed a little bit. But after another couple of days, it'll always go back. So that's one of the reasons I'm kind of thinking that I will take them off rather than leave them on for extended periods of time, because I imagine the longer you leave them on, the longer it would take for that rubber to come back. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it seems like that's the case. And it's nice to let that sort of go back to its natural position, I think, quite often. So once the metal hook things are in place, you can then just push the rubber feet over the top and nestle it all in, and that sort of aligns it, gets to the right place, and you can see how it sort of clamps on top of the sides of the car there. So the rubber feet have got these nice little icons on that make it really crystal clear which point in the car they're for, so you can just glance at those and chuck the right one on. So the nice thing about the bars themselves is once the nuts are completely off, which they have to be for you to have taken it off, you can just store the bars as they are. There's no bits that are loose or slidey or flapping about. It's just a question of grabbing it out of your garage and then dropping them on top of these bolts that you've just put in place. It's actually surprisingly easy to do this because the Tesla's not that high off the ground, so you can reach over and just lower it down and sort of settle it into place. So once the bars are on top of the bolts, you can see the threaded end is visible, and you just put the bolts on the top and tighten them up. So I think this is the bit that scares people, with the potential for over tightening these bolts, and that's not helped by the fact that early versions of the bars had a different torque setting to the ones that you get now. They reduced the recommended torque, so they're now saying it's 2.5 Newton meters to 3.5. So I'm always going on nearer the 2.5 end of that. I don't see any reason to go any tighter than that. They actually say in the manual that it's tight enough when there's no play at all, and there's definitely no play at all even at the lower end of that. So I did want to be really sure that I was getting the torque right on these nuts, so I bought a bike torque wrench to check them. So I think it's interesting to compare when you use the hex key with the shorter end as the lever, tightening that by hand until you're sort of it's hurting your fingers to push it any further. How tight is that compared to what it should be when you check it with a torque wrench? And it's interesting that it's actually only just slightly less than the 2.5 Newton meters. So with me tightening it by hand, I was just under the 2.5 Newton meters. I could just turn it sort of less than a quarter of a turn further when I did the torque wrench. So I actually just backed it back to that point. So I'm actually quite happy that tightening by hand with the hex key using the shorter end for leverage is about the right kind of tension to put on these. you definitely don't need to use the long end of the hex key to get extra leverage. That would easily get it past the point I think that it needs to be. But once you've done it a few times with the torque wrench, you do realise that it's definitely not a lot of torque that these nuts need. And so after doing that, even with that low torque, you can definitely feel the whole thing is very solid. There's no play or anything like that. And when you lock these in place, the little lever goes up into the nut, so there's no chance of it undoing. So all you're doing is putting the tension on the clamps, and then the locking mechanism will prevent any chance of them unwinding through vibration or anything like that. So it's nice to see once you've tightened these to that torque that you can still see that gap between the rubber feet and the glass. And you know the clamp below the glass is also below the metal clamping point there as well. So you can see there's no tension on the glass at all. So I'm not concerned that there's a risk of this glass breaking with these on. So once you've locked the nuts in place with the key, you have these plastic covers that go on the outside. And these are a little bit funny. They do feel like they could potentially fly off. But then actually you try and take them off and you realise they are kind of hooked on a bit more than you think they are. I think the key to making sure is they definitely are hooked on before you leave them. I think the risk is that you might not actually click in the little teeth properly when you're putting them on. So just make sure you've definitely got them clicked on properly. And I don't think there's any issue there. So I'm going to do a sound test now. So I'll record this with my point of view setup with my binaural microphones, which are actually situated right in my ears. So you get a very accurate 3D soundscape of what it's like to be driving the car with these on and with these off. And I'll just cut between them at the same points in the road, on the same road at the same speed. So it should be a pretty good indication as to the noise these things make. And I'll also put the results of my range test up on the screen as well. So I hope this has been an interesting look at the Tesla roof bars. I think it's interesting because the Tesla's got this kind of idea that it might be a bit of a kind of frilly car. It's not necessarily that utilitarian, but it has a lot more utility to it than meets the eye. But actually, once you clamp these roof bars on, you've got a car with a roof rack and you can chuck stuff up there like any other car. And the way they go on and off is actually really easy, and they're really solid, good bars. So I don't think there's a problem here. It's kind of, you've got the best of both worlds, modern, aerodynamic, sleek, fancy, fast car, but you put the bars on and it's suddenly a useful family car for karting, camping stuff, or mountain bikes around. So let me know if you're using the tow hitch or the roof bars, or if you found any other third-party bars that you're happy with in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.